There is this cocktail party fact that's been floating around for, gosh, about a decade now. It's basically a rite of passage for anyone who has ever spat in a tube for one of those DNA ancestry tests.
Oh, right. Are you talking about the one where we share 50% of our DNA with bananas?
Mm-hmm.
Because that one always kind of humbles me.
No, no. Well, I mean, that is a very good reality check. No, I'm talking about the Neanderthal thing.
Fine.
Yeah, the fact that if your ancestry is from literally anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you're walking around with, about 2% Neanderthal DNA. It's this fun little aha moment we all share with the listener. Like, oh, look at me, I'm sophisticated, I drive a hybrid, and I'm also part caveman.
It's a profound realization when you really think about it. It's like this genetic ghost in the machine, just a physical remnant of a time when we weren't the only humans on the block.
Exactly. But here is the question I really don't think enough people stop to ask. We accept the DNA is there. We accept that our ancestors hooked up with Neanderthals. But have you ever stopped to wonder how? Like, specifically.
You mean the actual mechanics of the meetup?
I mean the Pleistocene dating scene. Because we aren't just talking about random molecules colliding in a petri dish here. We're talking about people, or at least distinct groups of humans, meeting, sizing each other up, and apparently getting very cozy.
Very cozy.
Right. And for a long time, I just assumed it was entirely random. Boy meets girl, boy has a heavy brow ridge, girl is a modern human, or vice versa, and nature just takes its course.
Yeah, that's a really fair assumption. We tend to think of nature as chaotic, but it turns out this wasn't random at all.
Not even close. And that is exactly why we are here today, because literally today, February 26, 2026, a brand new study just dropped in the journal Science that completely reconstructs the sex lives of our ancestors. And let me tell you, the results are shockingly specific.
It is a phenomenal piece of detective work. The researchers, this is a team from the University of Pennsylvania, are suggesting that the interbreeding between us and Neanderthals was highly sex-biased.
Right.
It wasn't a free-for-all at all. It looks like there was a very strong, very persistent pattern of Neanderthal men pairing up with modern human women.
Neanderthal men and modern human women.
No.
A very specific preference, like a type, if you will.
A type that seems to have persisted for thousands of years.
Which is wild. So today on the Deep Dive, we're going to unpack this. We're going to figure out how in the world scientists can look at a strand of DNA today and tell you who was sleeping with whom 50,000 or even 250,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're going to ask the big question, was this love? Was it war? Or was it just geography?
Well, it's a story written entirely on the X chromosome.
Yes. So let's start with the mystery that kicked this whole investigation off, because before this study came out, scientists were scratching their heads over something called the Neanderthal desert.
Right. And I know that sounds like a terrible vacation spot, but in genetic terms, it refers to a very specific anomaly in our own genome.
Paint the picture for us.
Okay, so we know that humans and Neanderthals split from a common ancestor roughly 600,000 years ago. Neanderthals went north to master the Ice Age climates of Europe and Asia, and our ancestors stayed in the warmth of Africa.
So we have a really long separation, different environments, completely different selection pressures. We are effectively becoming aliens to one another over that time.
In many ways, yes. And then, much later, humans leave Africa, they bump into Neanderthals, and they interbreed. Mm-hmm. That is where we get that 2% Neanderthal DNA.
Right.
But here's the weird part. That DNA isn't spread evenly. It's scattered around most of our chromosomes, but when you look at the human X chromosome, which is one of the sex chromosomes, it is almost completely empty of Neanderthal DNA.
It's just a barren wasteland.
Exactly. Hence the desert. And this was a huge red flag for geneticists. The X chromosome is packed with vital genes. Genes for brain development, immune function, reproduction. If you see a foreign DNA sequence getting scrubbed from the X chromosome, it usually means one thing. It means the DNA was bad for you.
So for the last decade or so, the leading theory was biological incompatibility.
Or the toxic gene theory.
Which sounds incredibly ominous.
It really does, but it's just basic natural selection logic.
Yeah.
The idea was that because we had been separated for 500,000 years, our genomes had drifted too far apart. Scientists thought that when a human and a Neanderthal had a baby, the Neanderthal genes on the X chromosome might have caused severe health problems.
Like what?
Maybe the male offspring were sterile.
Oh, like a mule.
Exactly like a mule. When a horse and a donkey mate, you get a mule, but the mule can't reproduce. We thought something similar, though maybe slightly less drastic, was happening here. We thought the hybrid kids who had the Neanderthal X just didn't survive, or didn't reproduce as well, so evolution just naturally purged that toxic DNA out of our system. Survival of the fittest.
So the narrative was basically, we tried to mix, but biology said no.
That was the assumption. It's a very standard biological explanation. But then comes this new team from Penn, Alexander Platt, Daniel Harris, and Sarah Tishkoff. And they looked at this desert and thought, wait a minute, if this is about biological toxicity, it should work both ways.
Meaning, if Neanderthal genes are poisoned to the human X chromosome, then human genes should be poisoned to Neanderthal X.
Precisely. It should be a two-way street. If biological incompatibility is the real culprit, the Neanderthal X chromosome should also be a human desert. It should be completely empty of our DNA.
So they decided to check. They looked at the genomes of Neanderthals, specifically these really well-preserved fossils from the Altai mountains and caves in Croatia. And what did they find?
They found the exact opposite of a desert.
An oasis.
A flood. The Neanderthal X chromosomes didn't just have human DNA, they were absolutely packed with it. They found a 62% excess of modern human ancestry on the Neanderthal X compared to the rest of their chromosomes.
62% excess. That is massive. So while we have almost none of theirs on our X, they had a ton of ours on their X.
Which effectively kills the toxic gene theory. If human genes were toxic to the X chromosome, they wouldn't have survived in the Neanderthal genome either. They would have been purged, just like ours supposedly were. But they weren't. They thrive.
Okay, so if it's not biology, if it's not that the genes simply couldn't work together, then we have to look at the other option.
Behavior, choices, culture. If the pattern isn't caused by genes fighting each other, it is caused by who was mating with whom.
And this is where we really get into the dating scene part of the deep dive. Because the researchers used mathematical modeling to figure out what kind of mating scenario actually results in this weird mirror image. Empty X for us, full X for them.
Right.
And the model spit out one clear winner: Neanderthal men and modern human women.
That is the only combination that fits the data.
Okay, I'm going to need you to slow down and walk me through the actual mechanics of this, because I've got a mental napkin here and I'm drawing a Punnett square. Most of us know XX is female and XY is male, but why does Neanderthal dad plus human mom wipe the floor with the X chromosome in our lineage?
It's all about inheritance paths. Let's break it down simply. Women are XX. They pass an X chromosome to every single child they have, whether it's a son or a daughter.
Got it. Mom is the generous X donor.
Always. Men are XY. They determine the sex of the child. If they pass their X, they have a daughter. If they pass their Y, they have a son.
Right, biology 101.
So because men only have one X, and they only pass it to half their kids, the daughters, they act as a sort of genetic bottleneck for the X chromosome. Now, let's run the scenario. Imagine a Neanderthal man mates with a modern human woman.
Okay. Neanderthal dad, human mom.
Let's say they have a son. That boy gets the Y from the Neanderthal dad.
Yep.
And he gets the X from the human mom.
Okay, so that boy has 0 Neanderthal X DNA.
0. He has a Neanderthal Y, but his X is purely human. If that boy stays in the human population and has kids, he is never introducing a Neanderthal X into the gene pool. He physically can't. He doesn't have one to give.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. That explains why the sons don't pass it on. But what about the daughters? Because if Neanderthal dad and human mom have a girl, she gets the X from dad. She's carrying the Neanderthal X.
Correct. She's a hybrid.
Yeah.
She has one human X from mom and one Neanderthal X from dad.
So shouldn't she eventually introduce that Neanderthal X into the human population?
Only if she stays in the human population.
Ah.
This is where the model gets really interesting. For this pattern to work, for the desert to exist in us and the flood to exist in them, those hybrid daughters must not have been integrating back into human groups. They were likely staying in Neanderthal societies.
So the sons, who have no Neanderthal X, might have stayed with the humans. But the daughters, who carried the X, moved to live with the Neanderthals.
Or they just all stayed with the Neanderthals. Imagine a human woman joins the Neanderthal group. She has a daughter. That daughter grows up in the Neanderthal group, finds a Neanderthal mate. She passes her mother's human X chromosome to her children.
And because she is in a Neanderthal group, she's pumping human DNA into their pool.
Exactly like a pump. The Neanderthal men are the gatekeepers that stop their X from coming to us because they don't give it to their sons. But the human women are the vessels carrying our X to them.
That is incredibly specific. We're talking about a consistent social pattern here. It wasn't just a random mix. It was a structural flow of genes.
And the model shows that for this 62% excess to happen, this couldn't have been a one-time thing. This wasn't one Romeo and Juliet in a cave somewhere. This bias of Neanderthal male and human female likely persisted for generations.
Which inevitably leads to the question, why? Why this specific pairing?
The why. That is the hardest part for scientists to answer with just DNA. DNA tells you what, but it is terrible at telling you why.
I mean, my brain immediately goes to two very different places. One is romance. Maybe human women found Neanderthal guys incredibly attractive. The other is darker. Violence.
The researchers actually discussed both. One hypothesis is the raiding theory. Could Neanderthal men have been raiding human groups and stealing women?
Yeah, it's a classic trope in historical fiction, the whole clan of the cave bear kind of stuff.
It is. But Dr. April Noel, a paleoanthropologist who commented on this study, puts a big stop sign up there. She points out that we have essentially zero archaeological evidence of warfare between these groups.
Really, none at all. Because I feel like I always hear about prehistoric violence.
We definitely have evidence of violence within groups sometimes. But organized warfare between groups, not really. Not from 50,000 years ago, and certainly not from 250,000 years ago. We don't see mass graves with projectile points embedded in skeletons. We don't see burned settlements. The idea of organized war or raiding might just be us projecting our modern behavior backward.
Okay, so if we take war off the table, or at least put it on the back burner, we're back to attraction.
Dr. Noel suggests looking at female choice. In almost every species, biologically, the female is the choosy sex. They invest more in reproduction with gestation and nursing, so they're pickier about mates.
Hold on. Are we really applying modern dating preferences to the Pleistocene? That feels like a stretch. Just because birds do it doesn't mean early humans did.
It is a stretch, but it's a calculated one. If human women were consistently pairing with Neanderthal men, it implies some level of agency. Maybe Neanderthal men were seen as robust providers, they were physically larger, very strong. Or maybe, as Dr. Harris, one of the study authors, suggests, it was simply demographics.
Demographics. That sounds much less romantic.
But potentially more accurate. If human groups were migrating out of Africa and moving into Neanderthal territory, they were the newcomers. Maybe there were just more Neanderthal men around.
So it's a numbers game. You date who's available.
Precisely. Or consider the social structure. In many hunter-gatherer societies, we see something called patrilocality, where women migrate out of their birth group to find partners in neighboring groups. If human women were the ones migrating to find mates, and they happen to migrate into a region full of Neanderthals,
They walk into the Neanderthal camp and stay. That aligns with the genetic model we just talked about perfectly. The daughters stay, the human X floods the Neanderthal pool.
it fits the data so well. But there's another detail in this study that I think is even more mind-blowing than the sex bias. It's the timeline.
Yes, I wanted to ask about this. Because we usually talk about the meeting like it was just one big event.
It definitely wasn't. We know there were at least two major waves. The one we all know is the big migration out of Africa about 50,000 years ago. That's us. That's the ancestors of everyone non-African today.
Right. But there was an earlier group.
Much earlier. About 250,000 years ago, a quarter of a million years, a group of early modern humans left Africa. They met Neanderthals, they interbred, and then that specific group of humans went extinct. They died out.
But they left their calling card.
They left their DNA in the Neanderthal genome. And here's the kicker. The study suggests this mating bias, Neanderthal male, human female, happened in both waves.
Wait, really? Separated by 200,000 years?
Yes. Think about how much the world changes in just 2,000 years. Now multiply that by 100. You have two completely different encounters, separated by literal ice ages, and yet the social dynamic appears to have been exactly the same.
That is wild. That suggests it wasn't just a fleeting cultural fad or some weird leader who had a thing for Neanderthals. Whatever was driving this, whether it was biological attraction, social structure, demographics, it was deep-seated. It was almost a fundamental rule of engagement between these two forms of humanity.
It suggests a stability in behavior that is almost hard for us to comprehend today.
Now, before we get too carried away imagining a 200,000-year-long romance novel, we should probably sprinkle some of that scientific caution on this, because this is one study, right?
Absolutely. And in paleogenetics, one study is the start of a conversation, not the end of it. Benjamin Peter from the Max Planck Institute, he's a real heavyweight in this field, weighed in on this.
I see buying it.
He's cautious. He called it a clever argument, but he warned about statistical mirages. You have to remember, we are working with very few Neanderthal genomes, really just 3 good, high-quality ones from Altai, Chegorskaya, and Vindija.
3 individuals representing hundreds of thousands of years of history. That is a frighteningly small sample size.
It is tiny. It's like trying to reconstruct the entire history of the Roman Empire by looking at 3 random skeletons. He worries that what looks like a sex bias might be a technical artifact, or just a fluke of which specific fossils we happen to find.
And then there's the archaeology problem. You mentioned Dr. Rebecca Ragg-Sykes earlier. She wrote that incredible book, Kindred. What is her take on this?
She points out the archaeological gap. And this is a really bothersome issue for the field. If the DNA says intimacy, the archaeology should show it too.
What should we be seeing?
Well, if human women were living in Neanderthal camps for generations, raising hybrid kids, wouldn't we see a mix of technologies? Wouldn't we see human-style jewelry in Neanderthal caves? Wouldn't we see Neanderthal tool-making techniques showing up in human sites?
A cultural hybrid kit?
Exactly. But we don't, at least not definitively. We have separate tool industries. We haven't found that clear blended family household. So there's a massive disconnect between the DNA, which says we were incredibly close, and the stones and bones, which say we kept our distance.
That is the frustrating beauty of this field. The DNA tells you what happened at the biological reality, but it doesn't tell you how it felt or what the daily life actually looked like.
It leaves a lot to the imagination.
Yeah.
But even with those caveats, this study fundamentally shifts the narrative.
How so?
Well, think about how we've been taught evolution. It's always survival of the fittest. Tooth and claw. Toxic genes die out. Good genes stay. It's a story of pure biological efficiency.
Right. If it's not efficient, nature kills it.
But this study says no. Sometimes it's about social interaction. The reason our genome looks the way it does, the reason we have this desert on our X chromosome, isn't because of disease or sterility. It is because of who our ancestors found attractive. It's because of who they chose to build families with.
It humanizes the process. It's not just biology, it's biography. It's messy.
It is. And it completely challenges that old image of the Neanderthal. We used to picture them as these brutish, separate creatures. Maybe we saw them as competitors to be wiped out. But this data suggests deep intimacy. It suggests that for thousands of years, modern human women who look just like us, were living in Neanderthal camps, raising children who are half and half.
They weren't just neighbors. They were part of the family structure.
They were the family.
So to wrap this up, that Neanderthal desert on our X chromosome, it's not a scar of toxic genes. It's basically a demographic footprint.
A footprint of a very specific relationship dynamic where Neanderthal dads didn't pass their X to the sons who stayed in our lineage, but human moms poured their X into the Neanderthal lineage. It is a record of lost daughters and adopted mothers.
It really makes you look at that 2% DNA a little differently. It's not just a contamination, it's a connection.
It certainly does. I was thinking about this earlier. We always have this us versus them mentality when we look at the past. Homo sapiens versus Neanderthals, the winners and the losers.
Right, the battle for the planet. We won, they lost.
But imagine a campfire 50,000 years ago. Based on this DNA evidence, you have a Neanderthal man and a human woman sitting there. To us, looking back, they're two different species. But to their children sitting at that same fire, he wasn't them. He wasn't an evolutionary competitor. He was dad.
That is a very powerful image.
It really is. And if these mating preferences were strong enough to shape our X chromosome, you have to wonder how much of what we consider human nature, our patterns of attraction, our family structures, maybe even the way we form bonds across groups, was all of that actually forged in those mixed families?
Are we the way we are because of us or because of them?
Or maybe because there never really was a hard line between us and them in the first place.
That is something to think about the next time you check your ancestry results. You might find a few more ghosts in there than you expected.
Indeed.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening. And hey, maybe give your family tree a second look with a little more suspicion and a little more affection. Catch you next time.